Hello, everyone, and welcome to Reformed Ramblings, where we discuss theology, doctrine, and how to apply God's Word to our daily lives. I'm your host, Jahaziel Good, joined by my co-host, Dalton Minix, and renowned author, Andrew Stallings, and today's special guest, Clayton Tipton.
After this, that is really what's the background, which is, does the Bible have to explicitly provide a law in order for there to be a law for the state to enact morally? And I was trying to bring up last session, and we don't have to continue it if you don't want to, but just to
we need to continue this. We can. We don't. We're missing half the regulars for the John A's.
And basically, I feel like that if you're going to hold to a strict standard of only the Bible can, whatever the Bible explicitly says as a law can be enacted and enforced, then you would be forced to have like certain types of slavery laws in place, and you would be forced to have certain types of things regarding warfare in place if you're actually going to do a 1-to-1 ratio. And let me also preface by saying, I am not a person that shies away from a slavery conversation with an atheist. The slavery laws in the Old Testament are drastically different from the American Civil War slavery. It was more of indentured servitude.
I agree. Like, I would be fine with having the same slavery laws that they would have then. I would say would be perfectly fine in a modern state to have.
Well, I mean, I was actually thinking about this the other day. We actually have certain types of indentured servitude. I mean, when prisoners are condemned for a certain amount of time and they elect to work on roads, or they elect to work on, products, or whatever the case may be, they're getting paid well below the market value for their service. And so one could say that they're an indentured servant of the state itself. And that statement is more of a refutation for atheists than for this conversation. It's just to point out the nonsense of their argument.
We still have a lot of the same concepts of what slavery is. It's just now, instead of being ran biblically, it's ran according to how the state has decided. Like, you still have a lot of the same things. Like, if I don't do all of the things, like if I don't pay my tax on my home, the state will come and take it away from me. So, like, I am a slave to the state insofar as long as I want to live in the home without them coming and chasing me out at gunpoint, I have to continue to pay them. I have to continue to provide labor to pay them for me to live in my home that I've bought and paid for the rest of my life. If I want to drive my vehicle that I bought and paid for and paid my tax on it, I have to continue to pay a tax every year so that I can continue to drive on the road every year for the road that I paid for with my homeowner's taxes and my gas tax. Like, so there's plenty of slavery that's already going on. It's just in the guise of freedom.
Yeah, it's just a different type, and that's important for conversations with unbelievers. I guess while you guys were talking, I was thinking, like, do you consider theonomy to be a reflection of God's moral law? Like, I mean, it's obviously not ceremonial, it's obviously not civil or judicial. So do you consider theonomy in and of itself is a reflection of God's moral attributes and character?
Yes, and because I believe the civil and the judicial are the practical application, boots on the ground of what the moral law is. So I
agreed with you about that. I just added a clause of, I just to fill in Clayton, like, I would have to be convinced right now. I'm open to listening. I'm not hard set on my views, but I would phrase the boots on the ground more as that's God's application in time for an ancient culture. It's not that it's wrong to execute prisoners. It's that it was more right to execute prisoners in that time period than maybe right now when you capture prisoners. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, but I would say, so my argument is coming from a believing that whenever God wrote the law for the nation that he designed and raised up, he gave them the law, and I believe that you can have this, you can address the same modern context today with righteous adjudication from judges and not need to actually, I believe adding the laws is a needless step that just makes it worse, because with every law you add, you have to add more. It's a never, as soon as you create one man-made law, there's a new law that has to come into place for that every time. I had this conversation with our pastor because our pastor is more in line with your understanding. So we talked about speeding because just Jehaziel's favorite topic when it comes to theonomy is a speeding ticket. Like, it's like he has to go straight to the speeding is his thing. So that's what he brought up. So he said, "Yeah, I agree. Okay, so you can have speeding laws, but then instead of a ticket, you can take their license because it's a privilege and not a right to drive." And I said, "Okay." I said, "So now in your situation, with what you think would be ideal, you take their privilege to drive away." "Yep." And I said, "Okay, that person still drives. Now what?" "Well, now you take them and you force them to work. Like, you take them and force labor." I said, so okay, so far you've just created two laws and you've already made slaves because you decided to abandon God's law. It only took you two steps of someone driving when they shouldn't have, and you've already went straight to slavery. Is how you did it. I think you went straight to slavery. I said, or we could have just kept doing it God's way and we wouldn't have created a slave needlessly for no reason. So you would apply the scripture that we already have, which my argument is it's sufficient. So in order to disprove my argument, you have to prove that God's law is not sufficient to deal with it, and that there's no application that can be made from that time. You have to create some new category that has no application where a judge could adjudicate based off of God's law that applies today. So what you'd have to actually prove, you'd have to prove that there is a new moral category that God never revealed and that he never dealt with in his law. You have to create some other moral thing that is a moral obligation absent from God's revelation. Because if
I don't think that's the argument, though. I'm not arguing that, though.
I know that's not your argument, but I'm saying if you're going to prove that I'm wrong, I'm going to say the burden of proof is going to be to the person that's adding to God's law, not the person that just wants to believe it. Like, from a Christian perspective, I understand. Look, I have to make more of a positive argument if I'm dealing with an atheist. But if I'm dealing with other Christians, I feel like the burden of proof is the person that says, no, we need to add to God's law. To where the default should be for the Christian is, how about we just start with, my side is just dealing with God's law, and that's the only standard, and we don't need more. The burden of proof is for the person that says, no, you have to submit to this as well.
Well, what about what
I'm not forcing anything else on anybody else.
Yeah,
I understand.
The burden of proof
is going to be the one to add it.
Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, and my view though with the speeding is that I would argue that the speed limits are comparable to the parapet on the roof. It's the government setting a safety in place so that way, then if somebody breaks that and actually does hurt somebody or kill somebody or injures them, then they would be subjugated to God's laws or punishment, as far as like, okay, if you kill them, they die. If you hurt them, you have to pay for their hospital bills or whatever.
That's more of a general equity theonomy, which I think is a better alternative than what we currently have. I think the only issue that you have is you can still do those same things without having to create the new law. You can still punish someone for driving recklessly and injuring somebody, not just for driving recklessly, but for driving in a way that actually injured someone. And the way that you would do it is you'd have the investigation. You'd have here's the report. This is the claim that took place. Here's what the witnesses are. You're going to do it just like you would for any right. What we would have gotten to today is from Deuteronomy. Is it Deuteronomy 17:6 and 19:15? Anytime someone if they're going to be put to death, you're going to have two to three credible witnesses. You're going to do all of those things following God's standard of justice. And then righteous judges would adjudicate God's law based off of everything, all the details of the case, just like you would. The whole reason why we have the idea of justice and beyond a reasonable doubt. Those are all because of biblical things that they've derived from it, but then they have perverted it. But you have those standards still, and then you would just apply God's law to that situation, and you didn't have to write a new law. Right. I understand a general equity argument. I'm saying you can still do the same thing without creating a new law. You're just applying the law that's already there.
But, okay, yes, but you say you have to have 2 or 3 witnesses to say he was driving recklessly.
Right.
But who's to say going 80 miles an hour is driving reckless if there's no speed limit signs?
Right. But that's why you would look at the details of everything going on. You don't have to have, I'm saying you don't have to have speed limit signs. That's the exact argument that the Pharisees made, is how do you know someone's sin if we don't create this standard of which we're going to say this is what the sin is?
No, but I'm just saying, like, okay, if you're in a school zone, if there's no speed limit signs and you're in a school zone and you're just driving fast, there's nothing to say that that's driving recklessly. We say reckless driving is going 10 to 15 miles over the speed limit is reckless, or 20 miles over.
I think it's over 15.
Yeah. So we know now that if you do that, that's reckless. But if there's no speed limit in the first place, then who's to say that going that fast is reckless? Mm-hmm. Who's saying that? That's still man saying that is reckless.
And I think
also, if there's no school zone, if there's no signs for a school zone, then who's to say that you're even supposed to drive different in front of elementary school?
Right. I don't know. Do you guys think that not passing new laws means that there's no such thing as signs? Like, signs can still exist. Like, no one said you can't make signs. We're just saying you can't add more laws. Didn't say that you're not allowed to create a sign. Well, and we already talked about the fact of, like, you can still say school zone. Like, you can say that this is a school zone, but
I feel like in Dalton's world, there's just going to be signs everywhere.
No, like, you don't have to have signs. I'm just saying that
there's going to be red heifer signs.
There's like on his part of the highway that he's responsible
for. There's obviously no law against signs because it's not in God's law, so we don't make up laws saying you can't have signs.
In Dalton's post-millennial world, we've got he owns about 7 miles of the highway, and he's got 80 signs, like, just stretched out there. Like, it's like just straight Romans 1 quoted all the way down the side of the road.
Yeah, you could do that. You could do that. You could do that in the society prescribed by God's law. You can't do it in your guys's because there's a law against that. There's already a law written that you can't have that many signs. Canada just passed the law that if you post things from the scripture, you can go to jail.
Yeah,
but who's to say though? I mean, they're the authority, so they're always right because the state says.
So you can't post things from. I know we're like completely just not even reading John right now. I'm so sorry, guys, but
this is great. I love this.
This is Jahaziel wants to get straight to the after show, anyways.
Yeah, this is the after show. All right, I'm recording this right now. We'll get to the after show after this, and then this will be our first episode for the pod. Clayton's our first guest.
It'll be the Theonomist versus 6 kingdoms. 2 kingdom guys. God's law versus 6 kingdoms. Imagine.
I thought you said I was a Theonomist.
You're kind of, so as of right now, I would say you're probably kind of. By the way it sounds,
he's more like the host of the show. I mean, honestly, he's trying to give a balanced view.
Yeah, so far from what it seems like, at least on the only topic that you'll discuss, which is speed limits, you're some type of general equity theonomy.
Well, we'll find a different topic then. What's a different law that you can?
Well, I wanted to respond to what Dalton said. So
okay, yes, go ahead.
My argument is not that that man can make better laws or anything like that other than God. I guess I have 2 pushbacks. Okay, so I'll leave my 2 objections on the table for the night for this. My 2 objections are this, based off of tonight's interaction, is that where in the New Testament do we have an explicit teaching or implicit teaching that we are to create a nation such as the nation of Israel? Because part of your argumentation is these laws pointing to Old Testament, the nation of Israel prior to being the kingdom of Israel, these were sufficient for them. Okay, Where is the teaching that says where we are to create a new nation and bring those laws over into this one to seek justice and equity? And my second objection is, I'm trying to think what it was. Oh, I remember now. If theonomy is a reflection of God's moral attributes and that it's part of the moral law, then why is that? Why is a violation of theonomy? So looking at the United States of America and saying it is not theonomist, why is that not grounds for lawful rebellion, as the New Testament clearly teaches, that you have the right to rebel against an earthly authority when it violates God's moral law?
Right. I would say that there are many instances that it is okay. So, like whenever
Well, I
they
agree with you that
wanted,
it's okay to rebel.
right,
I agree with you.
right. I do that, but that's why I don't. That's why I say. That's why I also explained the reason why I wouldn't speed was because of wanting to be wisdom in order to help reach others, and not for it to be the same reason why I wouldn't be going around at restaurants drinking beer is because I know how a lot of people feel about that. The same reason why I wouldn't drive around speeding is because I know how people feel about that, and because I do know that there are certain, once you are going a certain speed, you have less control of a vehicle. I understand physics and not wanting to endanger people. I don't, so because I don't want to endanger people, I think it's a prudent and wise thing to not do things that put people at higher risk. I don't believe that 56 is safer than 54 by any measurable amount, so that we have the set 55 as the standard. And I don't believe that it is then a sin to drive 56 instead of 54. That's why my argument was based off of wisdom, so that I would not flaunt my liberty. All things are allowable. Not all things are profitable, or not all things that you of the freedom you have are prudent, profitable things to do. So I would say that deals with the rebellion side. I would say that yes, there is. You have the ability to not submit to unjust laws, of which there are many. Like, I don't think that someone is it would be in sin because they said, hey, you know what, I'm tired of paying tax on my home. It's my home and I shouldn't have to continue to pay for it and live in it. I would not say that that person is in sin for not continuing wanting to pay thousands and thousands of dollars every year to live in their own home. Like, if someone said I'm not going to pay it, and then they tried to form a lock-in and squat in their home so that the government wouldn't come and blow their brains out and take them out of it, because that's what they would end up doing eventually, is I would
Well,
not say
yeah.
that person is in sin because they decided, like, I would say, which person is, so I guess it would be, which person has the worst sin? The person that has bought and paid for their home, paid off their mortgage, came out of debt, but now no longer can afford to live in their home because the state is saying we want more money and they can't afford to pay it. And they decide, I'm going to live in my home. You're not taking it from me. Who's at sin? The man that's living in his home that he bought and paid for, or the police officer that comes and drags him out by the hair of his head and handcuffs and takes him out of his home? Which one of those two people are in sin?
Go ahead, Andrew.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. You got it.
Well, I guess I'll come back to your question if you want, but just to go back to my question. So you're saying that basically what you're saying is that any Christian at any given time can rebel against the United States of America on the grounds that it's not a theonomous state.
Not necessarily on the grounds that it's not a theonomous state, but on the grounds of that whatever that particular law is an unjust law.
So what about when Jesus says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and God's what is God's"?
Yeah. So what belongs to Caesar and what belongs to God?
Well, taxes that fund a fascist dictatorship that was conquering peoples in the ancient world.
So does that mean as much as they wanted to tax is what we're supposed to render?
It's whatever the government had established as a wage. I mean,
right. Would that be your guys' position? Would it be your position that if the state decided to say, we're going to just tax you at 100% and then we'll give you whatever we want you to live on, that would be something that you have a moral ought to submit to?
Well, that's something I've been struggling with a lot lately, because I'm like, I look back at like the Revolutionary War and stuff, and it's like we fought over taxes, but
Right.
Britain
Yeah,
was in charge of.
They fought over like a 3% tax or 2 or 3%.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying though. Like, so were they right?
You're also going to lose me here if we start bringing in the founders. Like if you're going to start losing me because I'm not inclined to think that they were biblical in their rebellion.
No, I'm not saying that they were doing it necessarily for biblical reasons, but they did it. They did that. There were some
It
that
wasn't,
used biblical reasons. Not all of them were consistently biblical reasons.
No. But that's my point though. Like so much of the church today in America is like, oh yeah, we're patriotic, we're America, like this is and stuff. And it's like we look at that and we're like, but we want to disobey what Jesus said to like Andrew said, just render to Caesar what is Caesar's. So were the founders right? And even the ones that were believers, were they right in fighting against a nation that was taxing them, or were they wrong in that? Were they going against what Christ said?
I feel like you end up getting into just war when you end up starting to talk about this kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying?
I don't think it's a just war because they were fighting over giving money to somebody that basically giving money to Caesar's. That's what they were fighting over. It wasn't it wasn't based on religion. We had religious freedom over here. Each colony could worship God in whatever way they wanted.
I get what you're getting at, and I know like John MacArthur, I'm pretty sure he had the same stance. Well, I don't know if that's your stance or if it's just one that you're bringing to the table, but I know John MacArthur, he had the same stance where he basically said that the whole war was sinful, but the entire premise of the rebellion was being taxed and being held at gunpoint over stuff and basically laws being imposed over you when I don't know if this is going to make any sense. I might sound stupid, but the one who basically being under the charge of somebody who is only using you as a cow to stinking milk. That's basically what was going on. The king was overseas, didn't care at all about the economy, at all about the colonies. The only thing that he cared about was making sure that he got money from them daily, and that's where the whole no taxation without representation deal came from. He wasn't doing anything to represent them or benefit them or look out for them at all. You know what I'm saying?
Is that a biblical mandate for a ruler to do?
To look out for his people?
To represent its people in some type of legislature?
I mean, if I can be honest, I don't know of any Bible verse, but I can't think of anything else that a leader is supposed to do except for represent his people in legislature.
Well, obviously, like a king, like King David wants to do what's best for his people corporately, but he doesn't have a republic or democratic system in order to do that. I mean,
yeah.
I don't believe that democracy in and of itself is inherently biblical. I think that there's biblical principles in it, but I don't think that it's necessarily biblical per se.
Yeah, no, which I totally agree on. I'm not arguing for like pro or against democracy. I'm not, or pro or against monarchy or anything like that. I'm just saying that their whole reason for it was that they were basically just being their money was being taken from them and they were being left to the wolves. That was their whole thing from it. But yeah.
I mean, I understand, that perspective. I mean, people in England had a higher taxation during that time period that they were represented for, and it was to pay for the war of the French and Indian War, which had happened only a few decades earlier. England was in big debt. So, I mean, we can argue about whether or not it was more proper to represent the American colonies in legislature, which would have satisfied them. I was just asking whether or not that's a biblical principle, and I don't think it necessarily is. So we're coming back to, was the American Revolution just on American? Was it a just war based off of Christian values? And this is where I warned everybody. I was like, I don't think that. Like, you're gonna lose me in this conversation.
No, I don't think that either, though. Like, and I'm not.
So you guys think that the king is that it is biblical. You guys think that a king can be set on a throne and not represent the people that are under him and still be a biblical king?
What do you mean by represent?
Look for the best interest of. I don't know. I'm just kind of drawing stuff off the top of my head, so I can't really think of anything. But like, basically, look out, represent, and look out for the best interest of. Basically, lead and protect.
Well, what was going on in colonial America? Basically, England was selling the tea, and they were saying like you pay 3% tax or whatever it was. We had protection over here with the British Army. Like we had, and all we had to do was just pay our taxes and stuff. And again, I'm not a tax guy. I think taxes are like wrong. I don't agree with them. But
Mhm.
but if we are to render to Caesar's what is Caesar's and not like if that's what we're supposed to do, I mean, it's not like the king was coming over here and he was killing people. Not at first. Not until like we started fighting against him. But
his soldiers were, and his soldiers were also moving into people's quarters and stealing their food and stealing their wives.
okay,
Obviously,
now
obviously, rape would be wrong. I mean, but on all of my studying of the American conflict, if there was, rape that happened, it was such a minority amount of cases that, and England was not against putting their own soldiers on trial. I mean, the soldiers that fired in Lexington and Concord were actually tried for murder in America, and they were actually represented by an eventual president of the United States, John Adams, as their defense attorney. And they were found not guilty of their, whatever offense, right? Anyway, I mean, more than likely it was an American that fired the first shot. So some hillbilly with a gun is all it takes. So, so to answer your question, I know I don't think that I don't think that representation is necessarily a biblical concept. That's not to say that a ruler shouldn't act with the good values for his people. It shouldn't be that he doesn't look out for them or anything like that. I mean, all this stuff goes down to Proverbs and stuff like that, but I don't see anything about representation in Old Testament Israel. I don't see that.
I think this comes down to also like we have been fed this idea that we're free and we should do whatever we can to be free, like just in general as people. It's like we're not a free people. Like even our representatives don't represent us. Like the people we vote for, they don't do what we want.
When our wages are garnished before they're ever handed to us.
Exactly. So we're not free. I think freedom is the greatest lie that the United States has sold to its people.
I mean, I think there's a lot of. I mean, I mean, we can get back on the Bible train if you guys want. Dalton looks like he's bored to tears over there. It looks like he's playing Tetris or something. But
I know. I think it goes hand in hand. I think this all goes hand in hand with the scripture. But because even the scripture says we're not free. We're either slaves to sin or we're slaves to righteousness. Right?
Yes.
So freedom's a lie. Like we're not free people. We make like I don't.
I forget what movie it's from, but it's like the actor goes like, "You're free to choose whatever whatever sin you want. You're free to choose." Anyway, no, it's true. But no, I don't know. Just touch the waters there with American history, and so that's where my position I feel like is. Yes, the apostles commanded us to obey God, honor the king, except when the king is in contrary to the moral law of God.
All right, so you agreed that the civil and judicial laws were application of God's moral law.
The civil and what? I'm sorry.
The judicial, civil, like if you were people
Yes.
like generally try to break them up, like judicial,
Yes.
civil, ceremonial. I would say
Yes.
that all the laws in some way, even the ceremonial, were and are moral in a sense.
Yes.
Christ has abrogated the ceremonial because they were all pointing to him.
Yes.
He's fulfilled all of the law, and he's abrogated the ceremonial law
Yes.
as this entire sacrificial system, and every law about the sacrifice was pointing to him.
Yes.
Right? So then were pagan nations that were not expressly given the law on tablets, were they ever punished for breaking God's moral law?
Yes.
Yes. So if civil and judicial laws are applications of God's moral law that God has revealed to us, showing that they are applications and consistent applications of his moral law, pagan nations outside of Israel were responsible to submit to God's moral law. Civil and judicial laws are applications of God's moral law. How is it that nations today, pagan nations such as America or England or wherever else, why is it that they are not also obligated to God's moral law? And if they decided to obey Psalm 2 and submit to the king to kiss the son, if it's because I agree, it's only going to be the only time you'd ever actually see this ever take place is in a post-millennial understanding. But is it not then, based on that consistent understanding of what the law is, all still flowing from the moral character of God that he has revealed, that us as his image bearers are then to model, including the pagans, have that same responsibility? Why is it that it's no longer binding to them when it was binding in the Old Testament to all of those pagan kingdoms?
Well, first of all, I'm just trying to take it slow because there's a lot there. So I agree, of course, that pagan nations today are obligated to obey God's moral law. So I agree. Can you help me break down the rest of it? I'm sorry.
God's moral law in application is his civil and judicial law.
Okay.
That he has revealed, and that we have classified them as.
And your interpretation of that is that it must be a 1-to-1 ratio. So if the Old Testament says that you're to take prisoners and women, then you can take prisoners and women.
Right. If you would be allowed to do anything that the law says. Are you saying that God prescribed something to be done that was immoral?
No. I think that
okay, so
it was something that was feasible for an ancient culture to do.
So
it is moral. If I was an Old Testament Israelite, it is moral of me to kill my enemy who attacked me, because there is nothing else. There is no other place for him to go. If I let him go, he's just going to join his friends and family again. He's going to come back in 5 years. Whereas now, like with different worldly institutions that we have in place, which are not perfect, but now if I were to execute my enemy, then my heart instinct would be that I have committed a murder, period. That's what I believe. Am I wrong in that? You can tell me if I'm wrong.
I believe you are wrong, because I believe that if God wanted there to be, jails aren't that complicated of a system. Like for them to be to say we are more advanced because we have prisons and jails, that we have other ways of dealing with criminals, as being an improvement to God gave the punishment of what the punishments were and what they were to be, and how they were to what was just for them. That's where the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It's what the punishment fits the crime. So if God's law says the punishment for this crime is death, I believe it's immoral to then say, but instead, we believe the punishment for that crime is 25 years in prison where he's housed and fed, paid for by the victim's family. We're going to give him an education. We're going to try to rehabilitate him. We're going to do all these things that the scripture never gives us the authority or the leeway to do. We're going to autonomously decide that us as the state have the right to try to rehabilitate criminals, even though God has never said that and has never even showed glimpses of that's what we're supposed to do. But then that's the same argument of saying we're smarter than the ancients because we're modern. Therefore, we have the right now because we're so much smarter to be autonomous.
Well, I don't think that your last sentence is what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say that we're smarter and at all. But so I will grant you that there is a slippery slope with what I'm trying to say and negotiate my position, which is ultimately it comes down to God explicitly said that these people had to die for these crimes. And if you give clemency to an enemy combatant, then in this category over here, then you open the door for clemency for people who have committed rapes and murders and stuff like that, which is also explicitly against what God said. And you're doing so based off of human wisdom and understanding, which is to say no human wisdom and understanding whatsoever. So I'll grant you that that's a weakness to my position. I mean, I'll admit that forthright.
No,
and I'm not, and I don't want to be in sin and say that I know better. I don't want to be in sin and say that I know better than God, or that that I'm super consistent on this. And I'm just going to say like, yeah, like this is something that I'm weak on, and that what you're saying is correct.
Right. So that's why then I would say then that every punishment then is going to have to do with what the details of the situation is. Like it's not every time you drove a car, someone died, therefore you die. Like there could be very well situations to where there was a guy walking down the side of the road in a black hoodie and there was no way for you to see him. And either way, you'd have to have the 2 or 3 witnesses. So if you're out driving your car, you very well could be in the wrong. Just like today, there are people that are guilty of crimes that aren't punished for it because there's going to be that situation, because God's standard of justice is what God has revealed in his word is that it is better for a criminal to get away with something than for an innocent person to be punished for it. That's what God has revealed to us. And that's why you have to have 2 to 3 witnesses if you're going to put someone to death. And if you don't have that standard, you don't get to accidentally just put to death an innocent person. You have to know that they are guilty, because you do not have the right to punish someone without knowing it. So it's also an issue of, it's not necessarily just the fact of the punishments maybe seem more severe than what we are used to now, but it's also because the standard of justice is so much higher than what we have now.
So, also, just out of curiosity, would you say that the punishment of death is always on the table, or always the punishment? Like, do you think that there's any room for like grace and
yes, I would say that there is, and I would say that would be
death is just one of the
right,
potential punishments depending on
right. If in God's law says that death is a potential punishment for that, then that's what it would be for. If it's the situation of it's an open and shut case, 1st-degree murder, no other, like that's why every case is unique, because you have to take the details of every case and then adjudicate God's law based on it. It very well could be different of that this person did all of these things and this led to this person maybe murdering them in a way they shouldn't have, versus like I'd say that there could be different applications of how the punishment's ranked done. If Jehaziel walks into a place and just shoots a bunch of people unprovoked just because he wants to kill a bunch of people, I know he's not for the record, if anybody watches this, if Jehaziel posts it, that's not the plan. Versus if there had been someone that has been bullying and torturing Andrew and his family and doing all these things, and something happens to where he ends up killing this person, maybe not in a fully justified manner, so that he's still guilty of something, I don't think necessarily they both have to then get the same death penalty, because all of the details of the situation would come into play.
Well, even the Old Testament law made the distinguishment between manslaughter and murder, but
right, there's different degrees of guilt within those situations.
But just to, I mean, Clayton asks an interesting question. But what about two crimes that are intentional, that are on the same level of criminal responsibility? This is both murder. It's not manslaughter versus murder. It's murder and murder. Like, and I think he's asking is the punishment always execution, or is execution just merely one of the crimes that the person can be punished? Because I feel like in order to be consistent, you have to say, no, the man that murdered his wife and then held his family hostage in his house and then surrendered to the police, he also has to be executed in the same way that the criminal who didn't surrender and had to be taken down had to be executed. You know what I'm saying? Like that, you can't give grace to a murderer.
Right. That's where all the details of the case comes into play. If it's just a blatant act of wicked murder, like it's just like a premeditated, or like I just decided to kill these people, that type of that's why every case though is treated based on the merits of that case.
Yeah.
So that if there's other situations of other details, then those would come into play with the sentencing as well.
Wasn't I mean, it's been forever since I've looked into any of this stuff, so forgive me. But wasn't it like the same type of deal in Old Testament Israel? And it was like, if you're not sentenced to death, then you'll still be sentenced to slavery for the person that you committed the crime against for X amount of years, or however they go about judging it.
I can't remember exactly which one it was, but I know there were different situations. Like I don't have the entire like Pentateuch memorized to remember every single detail, but either way, in principle, I'm arguing to like I'm fully admitting I don't have every single situation memorized so that I can just adjudicate every hypothetical crime on demand right now. I wish I had that. It would be a lot helpful. I could just put my application in for one of those judges already. But but I'm saying either way, that would be the job of the judge would be to, just like they study law books and they look for was it jurisprudence, and they're looking for all of these things through all those books and seeing how judges have ruled on these similar cases and using them for possible precedents. You would look at God's law, look at everything that pertains to this particular crime and within this category of crime from God's law, and then based on every detail, you would then apply the law to the context of including all those details that you have now in the modern application of it. So if it's a situation to where, let's say there's a crime that says that for this crime you must get this, if you're guilty, then I would say then you do it. If there's a situation to where, depending on the circumstances, there can be different punishments for that crime, then you are allowed to do that, and then you're allowed to do it based off always applying God's law to every detail of the investigation and the situation that has taken place now. And you can do all of that without having to write new laws, because you're still applying the laws that are already stand, because there's no moral categories outside of what God has revealed to us as moral and immoral. God has decided what's evil and what's good, and that there's no man cannot then just go outside of that autonomously and decide, no, this is also good, or now this is evil. So if God has defined what is good and evil, then everyone that's created in his image is at a moral ought to obey those standards of evil and good.
Well, I appreciate you bringing, you pushing me a little bit on this specific aspect of the timelessness of God's judicial law and pressing me to be consistent with that, because it is something that I don't want to write off or anything like that. And I do think that in today's world, there is a time when, like, for instance, the Supreme Court recently, like, didn't rule in favor of like a conservative position in regards to transgenderism. Well, if you're a supposed Christian on the Supreme Court, you need to be voting whether or not there's case law to support the decision. You need to be voting to support God's law, period, because
Right.
that's what God said, not because of what the United States said.
Right.
So
It's just like now, if there was a movement for Indiana that we could vote for a bill that would pass and would be like an abolition bill that would give total protection to the preborn and give them equal justice under the law, I would vote in favor of that bill, even though I know this should be an unneeded bill, because if we just applied God's law already says that murder is murder. But because of the context in which we live, I would be in support of a bill that would pass a law that I think is already just redundant, because we already should be applying God's law. But I would be in favor of adding that law because it's a situation where I have to apply where I'm at, because I don't live in an ideal situation. So like we all agree, like I think that someone could come to the agreement that a theonomic system based solely on God's law is the most biblical application of how a civil society ought to run, even if your eschatology makes you believe, I don't think this could ever possibly happen. But I agree in principle that that would be the best if if there were to be a time to where a nation is truly submitting to God and his word and wants to kiss the Son, this is what it would look like. And you could say that at the same time as saying, I don't think that will ever happen this side of eternity. Like, I don't think you have to be post-millennial to believe that God's law as the perfect and only standard for a nation to run is what they ought to be doing. I don't see that those things have to go together. I know they often do, but I think it often goes that way because post millennials will look into those details, because they believe that they do the groundwork now and the thought now and they write the books now, that in multiple generations they could just be a little stone that God could use for people to continue to build on, so that multiple generations from now, if things improve, people can look back just like we look back and we build off of Calvin or Luther or things that they wrote and how that we learn from them and we continue to build on. People can look back at the post millennials that didn't experience any of those things that would occur, but they could look back and say, yes, look what R.J. Roche Jr. wrote here, and look what Greg Bonson wrote here, and we see how they wrote, and they can build upon that multi-generations into the future, so that whenever those blessed, like we all live for eternity, even though that we're not experiencing that now, in the same way that people are looking to build, like the Christians are wanting to continue to spread the gospel and to baptize the nations and to make disciples, knowing that we're not yet going to experience that fullness in our generation of the blessings this side of eternity now, that there could be much more growth as Christ builds his kingdom. 20 generations from now would look totally different. So like I know that I'm arguing in favor of a hypothetical situation that has next to no viability within my lifetime. But my kids could teach it to their kids and to their kids and to their kids until Dalton Jr. is a senator in that type of situation, or is some type of a office in government in that situation where they are applying these things.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. You give me a lot to think about, and I will do my best to take it seriously. I don't want to ever like write off God's law in any type of way, and I appreciate you pushing me on that. I'm not letting my eschatology drive that. God can do whatever he wants to do. So